Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Philanthropy Asia Summit. Thank you for joining us in today's partner session, Catalysts for Change, Multi-Stakeholder Collaboration, hosted by Tanoto Foundation. We're delighted to have an exciting panel ahead with distinguished speakers from the Asian Development Bank, the Gates Foundation, and UNICEF, all of whom will bring their valuable perspectives on advancing impact through collaboration. So to officially open this session, it is my pleasure to invite the CEO of Tanoto Foundation, Mr. Benny Lee, to deliver the opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation on the power and importance of multi-stakeholder collaboration in philanthropy. We gather today at a time of great uncertainty for the impact sector. Recent developments have brought unprecedented challenges to our work. Emerging areas of needs, like the intersection of health and education, has presented us with new complexities as well as new priorities. The withdrawal of some major funders is leaving behind significant funding gaps and global economic uncertainties driven by inflation, trade tensions, and shifting geopolitical landscapes are shaking the foundations of traditional philanthropic funding. The philanthropic sector is being squeezed on both ends. Less resources is available, while more is demanded of us. In moments like this, the natural impulse may be to retreat, to narrow our focus, to avoid partnerships that might seem risky, and to turn inward and protect what little resources we have, lest they be exposed to the contagion effects of struggling partners. But I suggest that the wiser course and the braver one is to double down on collaboration. Because if done right, collaboration does not increase our risk. In fact, it reduces it. It spreads it. Partnerships help build stronger, more resilient systems. When we bring multiple stakeholders together, governments, private funders, philanthropies, civil society, and communities, we're not just adding resources. We are multiplying ideas, networks, capacities, and perspectives. We are doing more with more. It is against this backdrop that Tanoto Foundation is supporting today's session, not as the solution, but as a committed partner. Our work across Singapore, Indonesia, China, and the region has shown us that collaboration is about far more than funding. It is about understanding deeply the local needs, building trust, and aligning goals. From our partnerships with governments and NGOs to our most recent MOU with the Gates Foundation, we have seen how shared vision and open dialogue can unlock new pathways for impact. We have seen it work, and we want to share it with you. Let me therefore thank our distinguished panel speakers for also sharing their insights on this very important topic. Thanks to Fok Yen Chong from the Asian Development Bank, June Kunugi from UNICEF, and Ashwin Iyer from the Gates Foundation. Last but not least, our moderator, Xue from Bridgespan. I look forward to a thought-provoking discussion on how multi-stakeholder collaboration can catalyze change. In Chinese, the word crisis is made out of two words, 危机. Interestingly, if you break up the words, it means both danger and opportunity. So while we tackle the current challenges facing our impact sector, let us also take this opportunity to reimagine philanthropy, one that is defined not by individual donors or institutions, but by the collective power of people working in alignment. Let us emerge from this current situation stronger, better connected, and better prepared for the future. Let us be better together. Thank you very much. And without further ado, may I invite Xue. Over to you, Xue.
Great, thank you very much, Betty, for that powerful opening. I think this is really a moment where we're finding ourselves of real deep uncertainty, but also significant possibility, right? I think I don't need to say this to the people in the room, but the impact sector is under a lot of pressure, and I think many of us in the room feel the strain today already. With global donors pulling back and tens of billions of funding shortfalls, global systems under strain, and the needs around us truly multiplying, right? And actually, the world's most vulnerable families are the ones that are hit hardest, whether it's by inflation, by climate shocks, or the ripple effects of geopolitical tensions and trade wars. And as Benny said, in this moment, the instinct to retreat, to hunker down, is really understandable. But I think what we'll love to call on all of you in the room today is to lean into the moment and actually lean into collaboration, not in spite of the risk, but actually because of the risk. Because in such moments of uncertainty where the path ahead is uncertain, actually the most powerful thing can be to collaborate, right? To connect, to share resources, and to work together. So before I bring our esteemed panelists on stage, I'm just gonna share a bit about what it really takes to make collaboration work. Because I think I don't need to tell it to the people in the room. Most people know that collaboration is a great thing, but the challenge comes in making it succeed. So before we go back and start talking about some of the findings, I would love to take us back to a moment that changed global health. So 20 years ago, childhood immunization was stalling in some of the poorest countries. Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, brought together governments, UNICEF, WHO, vaccine manufacturers, donors, and frontline NGOs. And they all united around one shared goal, which is to see every child vaccinated. And since 2000, they've managed to vaccinate over 1.1 billion children, preventing nearly 19 million deaths. And Gavi-supported countries have actually seen child mortality halved. So that's a story of the power of collaboration, right? It's not a story of one single hero swooping in and saving the day. It's a story of the power of partners showing up year after year, really doing that hard work together. So that's the question we're seeking here to ask today, right? Because in Asia, we have all the raw ingredients. We have homegrown innovation. We have lots of bold domestic leadership. We have a next generation of philanthropists, many of whom are in the room today, rising to meet that challenge, all united with this collective desire to really reshape how impact is created on the ground in Asia with more speed, with more urgency, and more scale. But how do we make that work? So for recently, what we have done for Bridgespan is that we actually studied what the most impactful philanthropists, both in Asia and globally, have done. And what we found is consistent with our over 25 years of experience, both advising philanthropists as well as nonprofits in the field. There's one pattern that really consistently emerges, which is that no philanthropist who is truly effective, who's truly interested in driving enduring change, goes it alone. The most effective philanthropists actually manage to build deep partnerships, to stay close to the communities they're seeking to serve, and most importantly, they don't just fund programs. They fund the relationships, the infrastructure, and the systems that actually make that progress stick. Philanthropy, which is timely in a conference on philanthropy, philanthropy has a unique role to play in such multi-sectoral collaborations, right? The first thing is that they can provide that patient, risk-tolerant capital that underwrites bold innovations and experiments that may not otherwise be possible. They also have the ability to convene across divides, bringing together allies that may not speak the same language, may not speak the same incentives, may not have the same timelines. And across the last 2 decades, we've seen so many examples of when philanthropy has reached across sectors to enable some of the biggest breakthroughs in education or public health, right? Whether it's eradicating nearly polio across the world, whether it's helping to scale universal basic ed by funding models like Teach at the Right Level, whether it's just dramatically reducing road deaths in Vietnam by making helmets the norm. Philanthropy really has that amazing power of being that catalytic partner. And the main thing is the breakthroughs don't happen ever alone. All these huge breakthroughs, all this huge systemic change is only possible when funders, governments, multilaterals, frontline NGOs all come together to share that risk and to do the hard work together. And we're seeing this shift across Asia. So as you can see from the chart here, what we see is that for all the top funders, they're increasingly working across sectors, whether it's with the government, other funders, and the private sector. So whether it's new alliances like the Philanthropy Asia Alliance, new models of collaboration like the communities we just saw launched yesterday, but it's really a powerful shift in the way folks are working. The second, and perhaps even more powerful shift that we're seeing is that increasingly, these actors are no longer just designing for communities, but really designing with communities. Because there's increasing realization that when your communities that you're seeking to work with are engaged as co-creators and not just as recipients or beneficiaries, especially from day one, the solutions are not just more equitable, they're actually much more effective. They're much more likely to stick. So that shift from solo action to shared ownership is a trend that we're seeing across Asia as well as globally, and one that we expect to actually accelerate in this time of uncertainty. So why collaborate? Hopefully I'm speaking to the converted, but just in case, 3 reasons, because all consultants have 3 reasons. Firstly, together you achieve more impact. You're simply more effective, right? Together you can tackle much bigger problems, present much more holistic solutions because you're combining both the resources and the expertise. Secondly, together you're more efficient, which is especially needed in these times of leaner budgets because you get to streamline operations, reduce duplication, and share infrastructure. And lastly, because I needed 3 E's, I said engaging, but it's just more fun, honestly, to do it alone. I think we all know this work is really, really hard. In times like this, it can feel even harder. And when you're isolated, when you're working alone, sometimes it's really hard to get that energy and that motivation to go further. And what we're seeing is that when actors come together, they often stick it out for the long run. So the main thing here is that, yes, everyone is converted. We know collaborations, you can do more, you can do it better, you can go it further, but it only works when it's done well. So what does it really take to do it well? The key thing here is we know that collaboration is really hard, it's messy, it's slow, it's very, very complex. We recently did a study on what it takes to make collaboration work, and consistently what we heard from all these funders who already bought in and collaborating is that actually it's much harder to collaborate than to go it alone. If you wanted to do speed and ease, we would go it alone. So why do you collaborate? Because it really works, and why does it take to actually collaborate? What we have seen is that for the high-functioning collaboratives or collaborations, they really lean into the complexity and they hold that complexity and not just try to resolve it. So there are 4 key dualities that we see. The first is the idea of both vision and flexibility. Most people, when they're joining a partnership, they're joining because they really care and they have strong perspectives of what will work and what it takes to succeed, which is great because that passion is what fuels that urgency. But passion needs to be matched then with flexibility, right? The flexibility to adapt when context shifts, because we all know no plan survives first contact with reality. Actually, even more importantly, the flexibility to listen, to learn, and really hear another perspective and find common ground. And then the flexibility also to be able to share power without losing that focus. And that's what we see the best partnerships hold. That vision and that flexibility, the conviction and that humility, being very clear on the destination but willing to adapt on the path. And the key thing here that we consistently see is that it is not a race to the bottom, right? It is not a race to compromise and find the lowest common denominator that we can all agree on. The best collaborators actually manage to take that tension and collectively raise the ambition. And it matters because big ambitions really matter. Big ambitions are what inspire, what draw people to the table. But big ambitions, if not matched with, frankly, the money, the talent, and the time. It's just a huge recipe for frustration and burnt out, right? We've seen this happen. Great press releases, ribbon cutting, and then things peter out because they're not resourced correctly. The collaborations that really work both stretch towards the big outcomes, but are really grounded in what's possible. I think most importantly, and what we've heard consistently, is you ask the tough questions up front. So don't come in and let's be kumbaya and pretending everything is fine and work it out later. Actually, that's another recipe for disaster. You ask the tough questions up front and reach alignment up front. Things like, what does it really take to succeed? Who's going to bring what? What are the gaps, and how are we going to collectively fill them? Dealing and grappling with those tough questions up front actually make for a stronger collaboration down the road. The second thing is the ability to both imagine a bolder new future, but also pace the journey appropriately in a way that respects the capacities of each partner and also the communities you seek to serve. So the big goals matter, but they really need to be backed by real resources. The third thing is the importance of both trust and data. So trust is what brings people to the table. I think, as some of our panelists will share later, trust is what keeps people at the table when things are really tough. And trust is built in those quiet moments, right? The quiet moments of actually showing up, listening well again. I think listening is a common theme. And then most importantly, actually following through on promises. And especially in our region, I think the importance of relationships, individuals to individuals, but institutions to institutions cannot be overstated. But we all know trust and good relationships are not enough. What we really need is also good data. And I think we've had a few conversations with different folks in the room already about how data is actually quite hard to get. Good data that is timely, disaggregated, grounded in local context, data that you can trust is really critical. So you know what's working, you know where you need to course correct. You also know who's getting left behind. So that's a critical piece to invest in our region, both the trust to hold the partnership together, and then the data that keeps it on track, right? Because together, they're that powerful feedback cycle that really enables the partnerships to work. And then last but not least, big collaborations also need structure, right? You need someone who's going to send those annoying Zoom meeting invites, make sure everyone who's important shows up, someone who's chasing you, firstly politely, and then maybe not so politely for updates, someone who's holding to the timeline. At Bridgespan, we've been calling it the backbone organization, right? And the goal here is not that the backbone controls, but that the backbone really supports and enables, and it makes space for each partner to lead from where they're the strongest. And that's the last duality that we really wanted to anchor on, that in a collaboration, for it to work, there needs to be strong coordination, but we need to avoid the idea that there's one single hero, right? And there's actually about collective ownership. So 4 dualities here: the vision and the flexibility, the ambition and the resourcing, the trust and the data, and strong coordination and shared ownership. And that's really what we see as the discipline of collaboration, the ability to hold that complexity. So lots of theory, lots of principles, but I think really, really thrilled to invite on stage now our panel, who are a group of leaders who are really living this complexity every day and building partnerships across to tackle Asia's toughest challenges. Would you mind putting your hands together to help me welcome our panelists? So I'm really, really delighted to have with me here 3 practitioners who are really living into this complexity every day of making multi-sectoral partnerships work, and they're going to give us all the answers of how to make this possible. I'll just briefly introduce all of them, starting with June. June Kunugi is the Regional Director for UNICEF East Asia and Pacific, which she oversees programs across 28 countries to advance children's rights and well-being. And she has over 30 years of experience at UNICEF and very loyal and committed. So with really deep experience across many of these multi-sectoral partnerships we talked through. Ashwin Iyer is a Senior Manager for Philanthropic Partnerships in the Gates Foundation. He oversees initiatives across India, South and Southeast Asia, as well as the Middle East, and has over a decade of experience at the foundation, across both health systems, sanitation, and community-led development. And then last but not least, we have Fook Yen Chong, who is Principal Social Sector Specialist at the ADB, and you bring over 25 years of experience in TVET, or Technical Vocational Education, and you're leading the regional TVET work across both South and Southeast Asia with a focus on workforce readiness and skills development. Great. So we're going to dive in with a bit more of a personal question firstly. So all of you represent organizations that really believe in the power of multi-sectoral partnerships, right? Would you mind sharing what is one cross-sector partnership that you were personally a part of and that you're very, very proud of? Can we start with you, June?
Okay, I'll try. And first of all, thank you so much for, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. If I may, one of the multi-sectoral partnerships, multi-stakeholder partnerships, I can share an example, and maybe it's very sensitive, complex context, but it's from Myanmar, where I was the representative for 3.5 years, and the partnership is from the time, just at the time of the military takeover. And you can imagine it was a really tough time. I had a team of staff of about 240 people, most all nationals from the country. And it was, a deeply difficult time. Of course, everyone was just, I can't express it, but, shocked. Our staff were, stressed, distressed, and we were very concerned about the situation of vulnerable children and families and communities. And the key thing is, and I was also at the time, because our UN resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator was out of the country on extended sick leave. So I was actually the designated official for security for all of the UN staff, 2,600 in the country, and then with their dependents, it's 7,000 people. So I had a lot on my shoulders. And but the thing is, children were being caught up in the violence, and they were out there, and they were demonstrating, protesting, getting arrested, deeply distressed. So what we did is very quickly is, we had already been working with the Ministry of Social Welfare, but also a lot of civil society organizations, NGOs, on strengthening the support to vulnerable children, but this is like counseling, a hotline, and even legal assistance to children who had been in conflict with the law. So just overnight, and this really showed the agility, because before that, this was all part of our regular programming and strengthening of services and support through established systems. But overnight, because of the situation, because so many children were being detained and were deeply distressed, so we formed a partnership, and basically, the NGOs and the hotline continued. There was support from the private sector to make it toll-free, the line, so children could call in and get support, counseling. They could get referrals as well. And even the lawyers were giving legal aid free of charge, pro bono. So again, if there were children in detention, there were lawyers available to provide support and advice and even help individual cases. Our staff were, of course, understandably also caught up in situation in the sense that, they wanted to take action. They had a certain stance, of course, that we understood. But one thing that happened is that we found a way to actually ask them and to channel that energy into, again, supporting children. So they actually went out there to the areas where, the children were gathering, etc., but they were handing out the information on how to access the hotline, the legal aid, etc. And we had to, of course, make sure that, all the risks had been assessed, etc. But, it was channeling that into something supportive and protective of children. So I think, it was the best we could do in that situation, and I was just so proud of staff at that time, but at the same time, it was one of the toughest situations I've ever been in, so, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Juna, because I think that That's really the power and the agility and the speed at which that partnership happened in a time of deep crisis is really inspiring. Would love to hear a bit from you, Ashwin.
So thanks. First of all, thank you so much to the Tanoto Foundation team for anchoring this session, and thank you, Shway. I also see a few familiar faces from whom I have learned all about collaboratives and collaboration, so I hope I can do justice in my responses. I think we've had several strands of collaborations going on with UNICEF, with ADB on so many different occasions. I think the one that I've personally invested a lot of time and effort in, and the one I am quite proud of, is this piece of work we've done in India, where we've worked with one of the sub-national governments. They had engaged with the World Bank to take on a large loan to help a large rural livelihoods program. And we came in with very specific technical assistance to help preventive health and nutrition behaviors and layer on those messaging as part of those rural livelihood groups. That then branched out into supporting the livelihood agenda itself. And since then, we've been working with different ministries in India demonstrating models of farm-based, off-farm, non-farm livelihoods, and then are now actively working on trying to work with financial institutions and banks to unlock working capital for rural entrepreneurs. So what started off as a purely NGO-funded, NGO-driven project then became a larger partnership with government, with multilateral funding, and then branched out to include the private sector as well. So that's something that just been exciting to see the journey of how that's traversed and how it's branched out into so many different tangents. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really exciting to see how many of these collaborations, they gain momentum and credibility, right? Because like you said, it's not a single game kind of relationship, it's often a multi-game relationship, and that's really powerful. Chang, would love to hear from you.
Sure, but I have to say, what I share, may not be applicable, because I realize, every project we undertake, any partnership is always different.
Yes.
Because we work with so many different people who has different cultural background and also different way of, dealing with each other. So the one that I really remember really well is a project in India, in Odisha. I don't know, how many of you know where Odisha is, because, before I started working in Odisha, I don't know where is Odisha. Right, it's in the eastern part of India. GDP is about 130 billion US dollar annually, and of course, 47 million population, so it's a big state, but not a really, sort of a famous state, because it's still very agriculture dominated. Though in the recent years they try to do a lot more industrialization. So the project that I started was in 2018. It was a 85 million US dollar investment loan, and our direct key implementing agency is the government agency called Odisha Skill Development Authority, and it was headed by a chairman that surprisingly is almost like a volunteer, because he took a 1 rupee per year salary. Yeah, he was, his name is Mr. Subroto Bachi. He and I know each other really well after the project, so I can mention his name here. He was formerly one of the 10 founder of Mindtree. I don't know whether you are familiar with this company, Mindtree. So he took on this job at invitation of the former chief ministers. And one of the first things he did, when he started that assignment as a chairman of OSDA, Odisha Skill Development Authority, was to visit all the industrial training institute across the state during summer, to see exactly what kind of condition those ITIRs, the ITI are, and who are the people, which are the ITI that are, doing well, what are the challenges. So that sort of showed that he has a great passion, to make a change, right? Sometime around before our project started, he also visited Singapore to sort of see, what are some of the vision, he could get in terms of reforming, technical vocational education and training. So he visited ITE, and he really was impressed with Institute of Technical Education in Singapore. And he sort of set a vision that, whatever transformation, whatever reform that the ADB project is going to support, has that vision, that eventually the technical vocational education system in India, in Odisha, would also become, right? So with that, he actually asked the Institute of Technical Education to work out a program that could help to train the leadership of the Industrial Training Institute that he visited, and of course, followed by a visioning exercise. And the Institute of Technical Education actually approached Temasek Foundation to get a grant to do that program. That was before the ADB investment loan kick in, So there was all these multilateral, bilateral, philanthropic, partnership coming together. So what has it become, now? I will skip all the story because, I don't want to bore all of you, right? Odisha, as a state, one of the representatives, participated in the World Skills Competition in 2019 and won the first gold medal for India.
Oh.
That was impressive, right? Yeah, and then the government changed, right? From the regional party. Last year, BJP won the state and is now running the state. And this is one of the biggest fear in all people involved in development work. You work with a group of people for the longest time, and when the government changed, you think like, oh no, is this initiative still going to be kept, right? And to our surprise, at least to my surprise, right, the new governments at the state level pretty much wants to focus on skill development and even acknowledge the good work that was done, under OSDA, right, which partially was supported by our projects. So I think that is also another kind of a signal that something was done right, and there's this good continuity, which is really important, so we are really glad, that happened. But I guess, in fact, just about 2-3 weeks ago, I was also in Odisha, and we visited many of the ITIs. Some were part of our projects, many were not. And we see, like, there are also, other partners that are very well entrenched and supporting, the capacity development and also the implementation of new ideas, particularly, employability skills, for the ITI students to get employment, to be better placed for employment. That include, Tata Strive. Yeah. So Tata Strive is actually, part of Tata Trust. So we see a lot of all these different philanthropic, agency, NGOs working on the ground now. So we are really kind of happy with that. I stop here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I think from what we hear, right, cross-sector partnerships can really be incredibly powerful, but also really not easy. That's often a long, windy road. So starting with a bit of a tougher question, but if you had to choose, what is that one non-negotiable that you really have to see in any partnership that would really make it work? I'm going to switch it up a little and maybe start with Ashwin. So before giving you a bit of time, I'm going to start warming them up with a few questions first, but more excitingly, we should have questions from the audience. So if the screen magically works, it will pop up a QR code where you can submit your questions, and then we'll turn to that after a few more questions from me.
So I think it's one of the points you alluded to, Shway, which is a foundational layer of trust. Yeah. I think without that, whether it's between institutions or people involved in a collaborative, I don't think anything can move if that foundational layer does not exist. But I think one of the non-negotiables is having clarity on what the role of each stakeholder in a collaboration is, right? It's not just the expertise, but it's also what kind of role their capital can play. And I think it's often that fuzziness around this that creates a lot of friction and frustration. There tends to be this feeling that our capital is substitutive and not necessarily transformative, and different pools of capital are very, very different quantums and different sizes, but the roles they have to play are also quite distinct. So I think often the lack of that clarity, I feel, cannot lead to a successful collaboration. And the more we're able to do that early on, even at the design phase or a conceptual phase, really helps set up a collaboration or a collaborative for success.
Yeah, I think that's consistently what we've seen, right? That actually, ironically, when you come in and you try to all be good friends and kind of paper over the differences, it actually leads to much harder collaboration down the road, right?
And just to add to that, so for example, and I'm sharing this, considering this a safe space, but for example, there are often governments tend to think, oh, this is a philanthropic, this is a charity, they're okay throwing away money for no impact, right? And then there are some stakeholders, like even philanthropic foundations who say, oh, the private sector can come in and do this if we build it. But there isn't incentives that are aligned for the private sector to come in. So I think it's often the assumption of what this other pool of capital can do, which leads to not so successful partnerships, I would say. Thanks.
I agree. Would love to hear from you, June.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the non-negotiables is really the shared vision, because I think, clarity is very important, of course, but sort of underpinning that, if we have a shared vision, it means that, we have the same or similar values, we have similar priorities, and that motivation and commitment to really carry us through. So it's really having that common vision. And maybe if I can quickly share an example, and thanks to Tanoto Foundation, a great example is what happened in Indonesia around countering stunting. And so that's where, we had in 2021, 24, so almost a quarter of Indonesia's children under 5 were stunted. So this is, height for age, and it's a major national challenge. And so it was a partnership, because government will set the policies and the standards, but then again, communities also contribute local knowledge, and the private sector drives innovation and scale. And that's exactly what happened with the support of the Tanoto Foundation. So essentially that helped accelerate and boost impact much faster and in much greater scale than would have been possible, without everyone coming together. And just to sort of show the scale, the focus was on preventative education, so making sure that everyone had information about how to prevent the stunting and malnutrition. So that includes maternal nutrition, child nutrition, also the breastfeeding, both exclusive breastfeeding and then complementary feeding later on, and then sanitation, because a safe and sanitary environment is very important. And just to talk about the scale, again, 12 million people were reached, 45% of the districts in the target areas were reached, 3 million pregnant women and caregivers of children under 2 were reached, and 10,000 health workers and community volunteers were also trained. And again, and this is amazing, by 2024, the stunting rate had dropped to 19.8%, so again, less than 20. So that's measurable impact and progress, yeah.
That's fantastic, yeah, and that shared vision really helps unite people, right, and it keeps people moving that same direction. I'd love to hear a story from, an example from you of what is a non-negotiable.
For me, it would be ownership. Yeah, it's also ownership at different level,
Yes.
Sometimes, people just think ownership at the top, but, people, running projects, partnerships, programs, at the top, they are really busy. They have like multiple charge, multiple responsibility. So then, what it end up is that, the middle level, sometimes even slightly below the middle level, if they take up that ownership, then it is crucial to make things work. I will share 2 examples here, where the middle level ownership really make a change. I try to make it fast because I think both are also fascinating. Those who understand.
I have a lot of questions to ask, so I need.
We'll have time. One is in Madhya Pradesh, right? It is at the middle level official is actually a state level official. It's not even an IAS, if those of you understand, India Administrative Services, right? The middle level of officer, state level, wanted, us to do something before our project approval. So, and we suggested that one of the priority for, the kind of project that we do where there are heavy civil work is that, to build a school, sometimes it may take like, 3 years or more to complete the civil work, right? And we suggested something really innovative at that time, which is pre-engineered building that has never been done in any of the industrial training institute in India. And the middle level official buy the idea and give the go ahead to do it, right? And the go ahead in India is also very tough because first you have to find the location, where is a piece of land, with no litigation, no issues, right? And we literally have to walk under the hot sun, close to 38 degrees Celsius for a few days to scout the location. And we saw, at this location in Bhopal. I don't know whether you all remember Union Carbide, the incident in Bhopal where the toxic, gas got accidentally discharged and killed a lot of people. So there was a piece of land which is occupied by an industrial training institute, which is really run down, right? But we managed to find something there, and there's this plot where there are a lot of shed as in storage area, storing junk there. And we requested this middle level official to find a way to get rid of all those sheds, and he actually got it done because everybody was telling us this cannot be done, and so that place was removed, and we actually used pre-engineered building to set up the place in less than 6 months. So before our project was signed, the building, one small building was already there, 3,500 square meter, which in a typical standard, at that time when we were doing the project, would taken us 3 years to complete it, right? But we did it in 6 months. And by the time our project, our $150 million US dollar project was signed, the center was already running and teachers training was carried out, equipment was installed. And that place, function until today is still doing well. And because of COVID, the main building, which is a 100,000 square meter building, took more than 6 years, to complete. So imagine if that middle level official didn't actually give the go ahead. For 6 years, you don't see anything, going on with the projects, right? So I think, that ownership at that middle level official was really important. I will just give one example, that's all. I know. Over to you, Shirley.
Thank you. So I think that, sorry, because we have a lot of questions that are coming in as well. But I think it's really critical, right, that both identifying and then empowering the right decision maker really helps drive that commitment, right, and that speed. To do it in 6 months is incredible.
It's incredible, in my
Yeah. One more question, and I'll open it up to the audience, which is that I think we've heard consistently, right, that clarity and that trust, the shared vision, the empowerment. I think also another piece that comes out is that for many of your organizations are all global by nature, and a lot of what you're doing is kind of finding the best practices globally and then bringing it to a new place. But that doesn't work if it's not really grounded in that local context. I would love to hear maybe from June and Ashwin about how you navigate that tension, if it does exist, where you're finding the global best practice and what really takes to work on the ground. You can decide who wants to start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in UNICEF we have a global strategic plan with, set targets and results targeted in key outcome areas based on key sectors and like health, education, nutrition, social protection, child protection, and then cross-cutting areas as well, like gender and humanitarian action and disabilities. But absolutely, they need to be adapted to each local context. So we have a country program development process with the government, and also we consult stakeholders and now with youth and children themselves, and really to be adapted to the priorities of each country, what's in the national development plans. We do this as part of the UN system as well. And then often, and then it's implemented and monitored, but that ownership is there, and I think that clarity is there as well. But there's so many examples where things that were developed in one context were also shared as good practices in another. And maybe to go back to India, because there have been many examples from there. But in the 1970s, so this is going way back, UNICEF was working very closely with the government of India on the National and Rural Water Program. And, there were these hand pumps that were, bringing safe water out of the ground. and mostly they were individual. But then there was a need for community sort of capacity hand pumps, to serve communities of 500 people or more. So they essentially designed a better product, which was a stronger pump, the Mark II, which was a locally engineered design. And then this was actually used in many other countries for rural water programs. But I must say, so that was the model. It was that groundwater was safe, and they were testing it at a time for bacteria, for iron content, and for saline, for salt, right, in case there was saline water intrusion. But I was in Bangladesh in the 1990s, in the second half of the decade, where they discovered arsenic. And again, it was coming from the groundwater. It was coming from the Himalayas. So we quickly had to change strategy. And it's still a problem there. The solutions, and so again, the regular, the more shallow tube wells were not sufficient, but they had to be tested. So a major testing program was developed, then deeper tube wells for safer levels of the aquifer, and then water filtration, rainwater collection, etc. So again, we adapt, but we have to continuously monitor, and then when there's new information about threats and risks that we didn't know about, we have to pivot and we have to find new solutions forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really amazing example of both adapting to the local context, but taking that local homegrown innovation and then also using it to inform other work you do in other countries, right? Ashwin, anything from you?
No, I think, so often a lot of global best practices, as you mentioned, June, are practices that have been tried in one context.
Yeah.
And I think when trying to replicate it elsewhere, it's worth looking at them as starting hypothesis versus taking the entire intervention lock stock. And for anyone who's interested, there's a really nice book called Everyone Loves a Good Drought, which is a compilation of short stories of what goes wrong when you try to replicate best practices without keeping context in mind. So there are a lot of good anecdotes there. But I think if you take the example of what drives behavior change or norm change, right? It's hard to expect what might work in one country will work in the immediate adjacent country. Yeah. The contexts are so different, cultural norms and nuances are so different, that it makes it almost a segment of one that we have to deal with. And I think for implementers and the way to build more ownership is, we like to use this phrase, let's not reinvent the wheel. Yeah. I think everyone has to go through the process of reinventing the wheel at some point to know what could go wrong or what are the benefits of doing that. So best practices are almost the blueprint of saying, okay, this is how a wheel should look like, but everyone needs to go through that entire process of rebuilding it from scratch. So,
that's very helpful. I'm going to move to audience questions, of which there are a lot. And I think this idea of replicating and scaling is something that many people are interested in, right? Because I think for a lot of us, we're not just interested in making sort of one-time short-term impact, right? It's impact during at the scale of the problem. So one specific question is, Chong's example really resonated. So how does the excellent work that ADB did, right, in Odisha of India, how do you take that one example and then try to figure out how to replicate it at scale, not just across countries, but even within that country? We'd love to start with Chong, and then if any of you have a point of view as well.
Yeah, I think I mentioned just now about the leadership program as well as the teachers training program that was put in place, that was funded by Temasek Foundation. So I think that became the flagship, because what the chairman, Mr. Bachi, did was to really identify, out of that, 70 over industrial training institute, ITIs, to find out, which are the better one, that he could pull out, and bring them together in this common visioning exercise, and then send them to Singapore for the training. In fact, one of the very interesting bit was that, you have to imagine that, some of the ITIs are really, in Odisha, are really in the countryside, in the deep rural area. So even, the principals, they also need to have some capacity building before they can go for such, training program. In fact, many of them were sort of first time leaving the country, back then, when we started that leadership training program. And what the chairman did, was to make sure that there's a 1 week orientation for them, about what Singapore is, how do you dress up, how do you speak, things like that, really basic, right? So that when they go out, come to Singapore, they could really be representative, in a good way, of Odisha. And when that group came back, there was a common visioning exercise, to set up the vision, the mission of each of the ITIs, and also what they want to achieve out of that, ADB project, which is to set up the World Skills Center, right? So I think, that sort of become a really good model. The other bit of it is that the World Skills Center also served like, which is funded by ADB, also served as a hub and spoke, because it's a really well-built, well-established. I wouldn't say well-built because I forgot to mention that that building that was given to the project to set up the World Skills Center was actually supposed to be a commercial building, meaning it doesn't have the required layout or even floor loading to set up technical vocational training, right? So a lot of reinforcement to pop up the floor loading was required, so that also exercise itself took a longer time, right? But it served, once it was up, meaning all the reinforcement was done, equipment installed, and it was actually partially open during COVID-19, right? And it served as a really good hub to train the teachers with good facilities, with good curriculum, and well-trained instructors that were really trained under the TF program, right? So in a way, that becomes a model, the hub and spoke model. As well as pulling out the right people to be trained, to be the next generation leader. And right now, the government of India actually approached ADB for a really huge technical vocational education project covering 1,000 ITIs. So ADB is going to finance $900 million US. World Bank is also coming up with another 900 million. I think this is probably the world's biggest TVET project you'll ever see. It's 1.8 billion US dollar financing, right? But for a good cause, because there will be the hub and spoke model. Yeah. There will be also industry collaboration, which is embedded in almost all our projects in India when we started off in 2016. So I will stop here in case my other colleagues here, panelists, wants to share anything.
Yeah, maybe very quickly. Yeah, it's such a critical point, and maybe an example of that would be that of a salt iodization. It's something that, basically there's a need for it in the diet. And, we've seen in the past, when I was in Vietnam in the early 1990s as a junior professional officer, I remember when we went on field trips, Lao Cai and Sapa up in the mountains, you'd see the women with the goiter, the big lump on the neck, and it's a sign of iodine deficiency. But even in cognitive development, so it's not so visible, but it actually leads to, lesser cognitive development, lower IQ. And so the solution also is fairly simple, but it requires that partnership and the commitment across sectors. And so it's about iodizing salt. And so what UNICEF did in partnership with, Kiwanis International, so there was a global initiative to try to iodize, globally the salt where it was needed. And so, but we had to work with the producers. It's a commercial product. So basically the government could set the standards, but then it has to be made commercially viable and the standards have to be met. Yeah. So basically there was seed money, and that was provided by Kiwanis and UNICEF through from other donors, to bring in the equipment needed to iodize the salt, to test it, to package it properly, because if exposed to too much sunlight, it actually reduces the potency. And so it was a real partnership with the government, the private sector, with Kiwanis, with the UN, UNICEF. So again, and that led from the initiative, and then it went to scale nationwide. And just to say, in East Asia and the Pacific, I think now we have 92%, more than 92% of salt that's iodized, and estimated productivity gain of about $12 billion. So that's huge.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think consistently what we've heard, right, is that for things to scale, it's not just about the intervention that works, it's about building that capacity, that local capacity that endures and can actually sustain the change. And sounds a bit crass, but the funding model is also critical, right? How do you figure out a way to fund this in the longer term so that it's not just a one-off program? I think another key question here is the idea that oftentimes when you set things up, something like what you mentioned, right, Ashwin, sometimes people have the idea that if I run a great pilot, the public sector or the private sector will just see how amazing this is and it'll run, right? And then what can happen is that you actually end up creating a parallel system, right, that actually doesn't get integrated. So how do you guys think about, from the very start, integrating it into current systems? Because honestly, it's much easier to go off and start off your own system than actually work with the existing and usually a bit broken system that exists today.
I can give a shot. So I think the examples of, good examples of where we've seen pilots or ideas being integrated into existing systems are ones where government has played a fairly proactive role in participating and at least crafting the problem statement that needs solving. I think often, even in the quest for replicating good ideas, we test something out in one geography or at one scale, and then it's a solution looking for a problem.
Yes.
So I think often, if you're talking about scaling anything up or integrating it into an existing public system especially, it requires the demand or crafting of a problem statement that needs solutioning. I think what really helps is building strong institutional capacities. Whether it is within government or even outside of government, you need to build the capacities of grassroots organizations to be able to support certain agendas. You need to build the capacities of basic governance structures to help play a coordinating function between public and private and philanthropic pools of capital. Without that level of investment in building institutional capacity, it becomes very hard to anchor collaborative efforts. And over time, we will see, I think at the end of collaborative efforts, we often get into the conversation of saying, how do we sustain this or how do we transition this over to someone else? And rarely do we figure out how to do that right from scratch, right? So I think embedding elements of good design and thinking about transition and scaling right from the start really helps.
Yeah, I think starting with that end in mind, because we often see sometimes people end up gold-plating these innovations or solutions, and you're right, they end up hunting for problems to solve, right?
Can I just add, for the private sector to integrate, I think it's not just so easy, even in the education work that we are doing, It's like, we always say, okay, whatever students we produce from the technical vocational education system, they should be able to fit into the needs of the employers. But in reality, you speak in any countries, ask the employers about the quality of the TVET, graduate, they will always complain, we still have to train them for many weeks, many months, And then when you go to the institution, you ask them what have they been training, what is the curriculum. They will say, we engage the employers, we discuss with, the practitioner. And then when you look at their content, they have been like running it for the last 30 years. Right, it's really difficult. It cannot reconcile, right? And so one of the things that we really do quite differently these days when we design be it higher education project with research component as well as TVET projects, particularly research. Research is also another area where a lot of research in the university sit in the shell. And when we ask the researcher, why are you doing this research? They said that, because I'm a professor, I'm a researcher in this, I really have deep knowledge. But then, do you know what exactly is the industry, wanting, What does the industry request, I actually don't know, I don't know how I fit into the value chain. So we actually started with economic value chain analysis before all our design of the project. Sue, is from Thailand, my colleague. She knows because we have recently run, through this economic value chain with 6 colleges on agriculture TVET, college projects. So that actually helps the faculties member in the college or in the vocational institute or even in the universities to understand how the training program relates to the priority, industry that the country wants to focus or the local economy want to focus, which part of their training program or their research align to the gaps in that value chain. Because for all we have come across it many times, right? cluster of colleges, doing the same kind of training, doing the same kind of research on one particular bit of the value chain and ignoring, the rest of the bit. The best example I have was in, I don't want to mention the country. It actually produced really good chocolate in Southeast Asia, right? We speak to the chocolatiers, the industry players, the companies that produce all these chocolates. Say, oh, the government has supported us so much, interest-free loan for equipment, training to make good chocolates. They say, but now we have a big problem. Our problem is we don't have cacao bean. We are not producing any more cacao bean, and that's a cacao bean producing region, right? They have to import, so they becomes not competitive because nobody look at the value chain analysis. Simple, right? The training is not on how to produce more cacao bean, produce high yield cacao beans, but instead only on just training the chocolatiers. So the economic value chain analysis for us these days is really important. We embed it in all our exercise and feed the private sector in, right? That is the integration of private sector, and we get the private sector to tell us where it is needed most within that value chain analysis. I stop here.
No, I think it's really, because they're very different examples, but they also both share that commonality, right? Which is the idea that you start with actually curiosity of understanding what the other person truly wants instead of making assumptions, and doing that painful work of aligning upfront, not at the end when you're done with your beautiful project and start looking for someone to take it on, right? We have time for just one last question, and would love to just end with perhaps coming back to the personal again, right, from what we started. So we've talked a lot about different parts of what makes collaboration work, what makes it tough, but in one sentence, if you could, what is one principle you would love people in the room to take away when they're thinking about how to build partnerships across sectors that really endure?
For once, I start first. Yes. I think, spend time, be sincere. That's my message, because, partnership is not, built in one day or 1 month, or even 1 year. Sometimes it requires a lot of investment of the time. Yeah. But then, a lot of us, particularly, even like Asian Development Bank, right? Sometimes we don't have that luxury of time, or it's very difficult even for us to explain to our management why are we investing so much of our time, in the field, engaging with our clients, right? But that is part of the relationship building, and when we go to the field, more often understand the context, that also show, sincerely we want to make a change, right? And that is, in a way, for me, how to win trust. But I shan't go into any more example because it's going to take time. I stop here.
No, that's a good question, Shui. I think it's like operating solo versus being in a collaborative is, the best analogy is learning to play a musical instrument versus being in a band, right? I think everyone here can show off their technical prowess of how good or how skilled they are at playing an instrument. But when you're in a band, you need to know when to lead and when to take a step back and let other players or other instruments come in. And that's what is the big difference between a cacophony of sounds versus a symphony, right? And I think that understanding of the role of what each stakeholder brings to the table becomes really critical when you're trying to collaborate, because, again, you don't want to make false assumptions of what someone's mandate is. Everyone's working on very different timelines, very different metrics of success, very different risk appetites. Spending, and all of these are not static. They keep changing over time. They keep changing when new people come in. So I think the more you invest in conversations and understand some of these intangibles that go behind a potential partnership opportunity, that really helps in the long run.
Last but not least.
I mean, as UNICEF, I need to say put first things first, and that means put children first, right? Because children are the foundation of everything, both the present and the future, and again, so this is where investment and priorities need to be. And definitely, let's stay focused. I think, as you said, there are tough times ahead, and so let's find ways to make partnerships possible and powerful, and built on trust. And trust is built not always when things are easy, but actually when things are difficult. So we know that there are tough times ahead, but let's power through this together and find the way forward. So for children and for everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Can
Please.
I just add one
Yes,
more
of
thing
course.
about that, when your project partners becomes your friend
Yes.
that you can call anytime, then you know you have done something really good and right.
So thank you very much for this very thoughtful and honest questions. I'm going to invite on stage Benny to present some tokens of appreciation to the panelists, and then we'll take a quick photo to commemorate the panel. Thank you so much. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Sean.